We often tend to think of folk song in terms of Merry England, dancing round the maypole, a rural version of folk tradition. But there was just as much a tradition of industrial folk song, which was deeply embedded in the coalfields around Britain. Now, A.L. Lloyd was a folklorist who published a book in the 1950s called Come All Ye Miners, Songs and Ballads of the Coalfields, and he actually used Mining Review as one of his research tools. So in Mining Review 4th year number 9, there's a very interesting story called Miners' Songs, in which Lloyd appears on camera appealing to miners and mining communities to dig out songs from their local folk tradition that he could use in his research.
We want to collect them before they disappear, so we're having a competition with prizes. If you know any of these songs of the coalfields, please send them to me. My name is A.L. Lloyd, and you'll find full particulars in the May issue of Coal magazine.
The 80 or so folk songs collected by A.L. Lloyd in his book, Come All Ye Bold Miners, form an important historical record of the ballads of the British coalfields.
There's a famous song called the Blackleg Miners. This is the version in the A.L. Lloyd book. Early in the evening, just after dark, the Blackleg Miners creep out and go to work with their moleskin trousers and dirty old shirt.
Oh, it's in the evening after dark that the Blackleg Miner goes to work. With his moleskin pants and his dirty shirt, there goes the Blackleg Miner.
This is sort of a comic song about strikebreakers, but I think that's typical of the sort of the salty, ironic way that these writers use their experience.
The Blackleg Miner, it's in the evening after dark. The Blackleg Miner goes to work with his moleskin pants and his dirty shirt. There goes the Blackleg Miner.
Now, several years after Lloyd had published his book of mining songs, there was a spin-off back into Mining Review, because in 1957, Mining Review ran 5 stories as part of the regular issues called The Songs of the Coalfields. These were all taken from Lloyd's research, using Isla Cameron, she's singing the Sandgate Nursing Song, and using particularly Ewan MacColl, singing a number of songs from North East England, Scotland and Wales.
One morning when I went to work, the sight was most exciting. I heard a noise and looked around, and who do you think was fighting? I stood amazed and Adam gazed to see...
And that in turn led to an association between Mining Review and Ewan MacColl in particular, and Peggy Seeger, and they supplied some songs for use on some Mining Review stories later.
Come out the gates, because it's my intention to let thee see whether you or me is the best invention. The new one being raised took up his place, and at it they went down.
A lot of what the songs are about are the problems of poverty, you know, the industrial conflicts that were going on in the coalfields. The corpus of songs in the Northeast is a sort of 200-year-old litany of this, of the hardships and the political and social struggle that these communities had to face.
What old Kate sent his notice in, just to vex the masters.
It's just a song that a friend of mine asked, and it's called The Working Man. It's about, as I say, a miner starting work at 16 and then finishing at 65. And it's just, it's a working man I am, and I've been down underground. And I swear to God, if I ever see the sun, or for any length of time, I can hold it in my mind, then I never again will go down underground. That's the gist of it. Actually, my husband loves it. It's his favourite song.
Pray tell me the cause of your trouble and pain. And sobbing and sighing, these words she did answer.
Fatal disasters had been part of life for coal communities ever since mining began. Some of the most powerful songs collected by A.L. Lloyd are about such incidents. This one commemorates a disaster in Scotland, the Blantyre explosion.
The explosion was heard all the women and children. With pale, anxious faces they haste to the mine. When the truth was made known, the hills rang with their moaning. 310 young miners were slain.
Despite improvements in mining safety in the 50s, fatalities continued to occur. In 1958 alone, 62 miners lost their lives in pit accidents.
I've been where there's 3 people in my life doing the pit being killed from me to you, next to me, with fall of stone and different things happening, and that was a frightening thing. Never slept for at least a fortnight, thinking about him being killed right beside you.
And could these accidents have been avoided?
Yes.
I was in the rescue team, and we had to go to a private mine in Tonnerevel, and there was a fatality there. This fella had got buried in the at about 3 o'clock on the Monday afternoon. And we didn't get him out of there until about 1 o'clock the following day. Now, when we carried that guy out of that pit that day, it was a beautiful, bright, sunshiny day. His wife was wailing. That really grabbed you by the throat, that did mind. That was not pleasant. But like somebody said, you know, that's mining, isn't it?
Mining communities have a special way of burying their dead.
Any tragedy, the funeral, it was something to see. You know, they felt it. And they'd walk a certain length behind yours, and they got in the cars when they were out of sight towards the cemetery. It was respect. They had respect for each other. The women included myself. If there's a funeral, you stood there and you just watched. And all the men in their suits and their ties and all that, they all followed the hearse, and it was a sight to see, and you'd be crying even if you didn't know who it was, because it was so moving.
One of the things about the way miners work is that they have to trust one another. They have to be responsible. You're expected to consider your fellow man. Individualism, in a way, is outlawed by the very nature of the task. So when you do come up, there's a great sense of release, and things are enhanced in a strange way.
When you came up the pit, especially in the summer, it was a brilliant thing to come up into the sun, because you sort of knew what you would miss, that nice feeling of being in the sun.
This quickened sense of life and the chance to be an individual again when above ground led to a flowering of artistic expression. A group of miners who painted were filmed by the Mining Review in 1959.
These are the eyes of Oliver Kilburn, a salvage drawer at Ellington Pit in Northumberland. He's worked there since he was 13. In his spare time, he paints.
I think there was a general belief that the arts were for everybody, and that you couldn't live a properly fulfilled life without having some cultural and artistic expression.
Oliver Kilburn is a member of a group started in 1934 to foster artistic appreciation. It wasn't long before the members decided to do some painting themselves, to learn a
Back in the early 1930s, the Ashington Group came together as a result of a workers' education initiative. They'd studied all kinds of different subjects beforehand, history and politics and all kinds of things. And although they couldn't find a lecturer that they wanted for their particular subject this year, they had the option of doing art appreciation. So not being one to shirk a challenge, they decided they would give it a go.
Working from a YMCA hut in Ashington, they pursued their interest in art by employing Robert Lyon, an arts academic from Newcastle University.
When Robert Lyons arrived in Ashington, it must have been a complete culture shock for him. He thought, this is going to be a doddle, because I've done it 1,000 times before, and we'd give them this, this and this, and we're hoping dry, they'd be happy. Well, they weren't. They were probably more knowledgeable about the history of art than he anticipated there would be, and therefore, in an endeavour to try and move it on, he tried to look at more practical aspects of art, and then realised that they were not susceptible to being formally trained as artists.
The group believes that the amateur shouldn't try to copy the professional. While expert techniques may be beyond their range, they can still express what they see and feel as directly and simply as possible. Jim Floyd, left, has been 47 years in the pits. He's working alongside Len Robinson, and he's putting the finishing touches to his Easter wedding.
But the men themselves would have been all dressed up in their Sunday best, but painting with whatever came to hand. There wasn't money to spare frivolously on buying paints and canvas, so they would paint with wall paint. They would use bits of hardboard that they had, bits of wood, whatever came to hand, and usually whatever colours they came to hand as well. And I do believe that some of the colours that are on the wall perhaps started off with a colliery origin.
For these miners, painting the classics had no relevance, for they, like Fred Laidler here on the left, wanted to paint what was important to them, such as their toolbox.
Fred Laidler was my father. He was always interested in drawing and in art. The open drawer is the one picture I can remember being painted. My father was a joiner. He loved being a joiner. He loved the tools. They were just an extension of himself. But again, typical of them, he knew the history of tools, he'd read about tools, he knew where they came from, what they were used for, and he cherished them.
As was characteristic of miners, they set up a structure with rules which outlined how the group would work in detail.
It's the Ashington art group. They made this rule book. It's incredibly bureaucratic. I think it sort of speaks a lot about the importance that they put on any activity they did. But number 5, new members to be informed when starting of the following conditions: a probation period, which shall constitute 6 consecutive meetings. 2, that the group shall decide at the 7th meeting by unanimous vote whether or not the candidate shall be accepted. Etc., etc. It seems kind of probably unnecessary in order to make art.
One of my favourite paintings in the collection is one of Len Robinson's, and the lady is standing on the table in the kitchen whitewashing the ceiling. The man is just tending to a piece of stuff on the wall. I imagine that's fairly typical. It certainly was typical in my house, where my mother would have done the stronger bits of work, and my father, if he'd been allowed to do anything at all, would have been something menial, or he'd have been chased out of the house altogether.
Wives and mothers are often conspicuously absent as subjects in the Mining Review films. This goes against what we know about how pivotal women were in making pit life work.
Men were doing the work, they were going down the mine, but at home we had to be very strong because worked such long hours that the wives had to see to most things. I mean, my husband didn't know what shopping was until he retired. You know, he didn't know how much a pair of shoes were.